Why sanctions are effective and how to make them even more so. Sanctions should restricting Russian technological import, resources export, maximize brain drain, technological chains collapsing. Russia will lose the war, which will topple regime. Many argue that sanctions are ineffective. That's false. They are already highly effective in undermining Russian military efforts and can be made even more efficient. They can guarantee that Russia loses this war if they are goal-oriented and not moral crusade-oriented. Thread: what would moral crusade-oriented sanctions look like? Inflict economic damage, so that population revolts and overthrows the regime. That's an imbecile idea that never really worked and probably never will. Goal-oriented sanctions look differently. Maximize systemic shock in order to paralyze technological chains. That will lead to a military defeat, which will entail the fall of regime. That's a great idea which usually works. It worked out with the USSR, for example. Two previous Russian regimes, Russian Empire and the USSR, fall exactly this way. Regime launched a small victorious war against an obviously inferior enemy, considering that the victory is guaranteed. Regime can't shut up about how weak and pathetic the enemy is, and yet, this hubris works against you. With first defeats from an enemy whom you described as so much inferior, your mythos equals power crumbles. You're very unlikely to survive that, even if no enemy soldier ever set foot on your territory. That's how Russian Empire and USSR fell. In both cases Russia was materially far superior than its enemy. It had more people, more resources, stronger industry. So if Russia respected its enemy just a little, it could have won, but it didn't respect them at all. Russian disrespect of Japan, for example, looks stunning. Interestingly enough, international public opinion and media largely shared this point of view. They also disrespected Japan and usually took Russian victory as guaranteed. After all, Russians are white. Of course they'll crush those Asiatics. Consider how they painted Japanese artillery. This hubris impressed me when reading Kipling's memoirs. He visited Japan, saw their military maneuvers and mocked this nation of blind imitators. Pretty much everyone viewed Japanese as frauds and expected a quick defeat. As a result, Russian defeats, which were materially speaking not that impressive, had devastating moral effect. Empire had men, had resources, had industry, but its mythos was destroyed. Absolutism fell and very quickly the monarchy fell, too. Ergo, poverty does not topple regime, material sufferings do not topple regime, but military defeat in a small victorious war absolutely does. This is typical for Russian history, and if you consider history of other regions, like Latin America, it starts looking as a general rule. Economic sufferings in Russia are now absolutely obvious. Here you see two women fighting over a frying pan in the last day before IKEA closes its business in Russia. Prices on literally whatever are skyrocketing. TikTok is full of videos where people discuss the incredible prices on food and, well, everything.
Блять, мужики, блять, я в шоке. Вот этот вот ебучий пакет весом, блять, вот на мизинце спокойно держу, мизинец даже не гнется, блять. 600 грамм. 880 рублей, ебать вас в очко. Че у меня здесь? Хлеб. Хлеб, блять. Ебучие таблетки для унитаза, 40 рублей. Ебучий доширак. Что там еще, 40 рублей, да? Ну, может, чуть подороже. 2 салата, блядь. Ну, сколь там? Ну, ни о чем. Сыр. Ну, сыр рублей 200 с лихуем. Колбаса. Ну, 200 с лихуем. Пакет пустой. Ни сигарет, ни пива, блядь, ни закуски. Ни хуя. Че там, от 13-й зарплаты откажемся, блядь? В пользу ЛНР, ДНР или еще чего, или в пользу Крыма. Ебать, вы охуели или где? Плешивый, ты не ебанулся ли? Мы скоро, блядь, на 1000 и вот это не купим. Ты че, гондон, со страной делаешь? Ты берега попутал или че? Это че за пиздец? 880 вот за это вот, все. Вот мне в рейс ехать, блядь, я вот взял себе на перекусить по дороге, блядь. Мне ехать 1000 километров, мне вот этого хватит. Но 1000, ёб твою мать. Ты страну принял с курсом доллара 13. Сейчас доллар 80. Ты, блядь, ты вообще понимаешь, что происходит?
Here you see people keen to get cash from an ATM in the very late hours. That's understandable. In the times of crisis you quickly realize that cash is real money. Whole money on bank accounts are not so real, to be honest.
Москва, 2022 год. Очередь, банкомат. 2 часа ночи.
Today Russian central bank prohibited people to buy cash dollars or euros for 3 months. Interestingly, they didn't prohibit converting rubles to USD euros on your bank accounts. You are totally allowed to keep USD euros in Russian banks. You're not just allowed to buy cash. If you think about it, this is a smart decision. Cash is hardly controllable and greedy citizens might sneak it from the motherland. Meanwhile, whatever USD euros you have on your accounts can be frozen, forcibly converted to rubles etc. at any moment, so you can keep it for a while. At this point people started realizing that previous standards of life are gone. That's people queuing to McDonald's to get one last touch of fast food before this chain stops its operations in Russia. At this point authorities are closing regional media en masse. They are not oppositional. It's just local news, but these local media give a picture of a general economic collapse. I just took some random news from Bryansk, Rostov, Saratov and Volgodonsk. Destruction of technological chains is critical damage when it happens amidst of a war, and it has already started. Largest car producer Avtov has started halting production. Renault and Hyundai factories in Russia halted. 2. Why? Shortage of microchips. Microchips are a major bottleneck in modern industry. Russia doesn't produce them. China theoretically could fill the gap, but it will take years. So any sort of complex manufacturing in Russia will critically depend on getting microchips through proxy firms. A point of failure. It seems that many factories are already stopping production and will be firing workers. Who is especially vulnerable? Well, those working for domestic market. Domestic demand destroyed. We don't need domestic producers anymore. We'll have major layoffs soon. Those working for domestic markets are being fired, because there's no work for them now. Those working for export markets striking, because hyperinflation destroyed their wages. This is not a major phenomenon yet, but a petrochemical plant in Nizhnekamsk is striking already. One of the most obvious markers of decline is Putin's face everywhere. Why do they put so many billboards with Putin? Well, previously there used to be commercial billboards here, but since nobody's buying advertisement anymore, we'll put Putin instead. Situation on export markets is a bit more complicated. As I described here, Russia is critically dependent upon exporting natural resources to the West. Blocking this export flows would inflict a mortal blow on Putin's economy and the regime. Are these export flows being stopped? Not really. As you see, EU natural gas import from Russia has been quickly growing since the beginning of March, dark red line. This increase in EU gas imports allows Russian state companies to profit lavishly and fills Putin's coffers. On a bright side, we're already having acts of sabotage such as British dockers refusing to unload Russian tankers. 7 of them are already rejected service by the docker unions. If continental Europeans team up, it will create a major problem for Russian exports. And yet, even without Russian exports stopped completely, severing technological import from the West will disrupt Russian technological chains. Russian factories use Western industrial machines. Russia produces almost none of its own details, technologies, IT products. Russian industry widely uses Cisco computer systems. Now Cisco stopped its operations. ceased maintaining equipment and is blocking it. That's an internal document of the main radio frequency center, managing Russian radio infrastructure. Of course they use Cisco. Of course they are alarmed. Until this moment Russia was reliant on export of natural goods to the West and on technological imports from the West. Nowadays technological import will be very hard, expensive and vulnerable, coming through a few bottlenecks such as Georgia, which didn't sanction Russia yet. Could there be potential alternatives to the technological dependence from the West? Yes, China. Putin is now absolutely determined to reorient to China, and if he stays in power, Russia will become Chinese economic colony with Chinese companies buying all assets at dump prices. Russian economic history could look somewhat ironic. 1. Stalin's slaves built industry at the cost of millions of lives. 2. Yeltsin transformed these plants to limiteds. 3. Putin destroyed their value in a war. 3. Chinese bought these slave-built assets for nothing. Trust the plan, but there are several problems with this plan. Firstly, Russian-Chinese partnership is very unequal. China can have any trade partner, Russia has only China. Of course Chinese will skyrocket the price of their exports to Russia, done, and buy Russian resources for nothing, done.